everybody. Thanks for coming out as we talk about villains, violence, and Vogue in professional wrestling and in superhero comic books and the like. So I just want to start with a quote from a fictional author in a comic book known as Saga by Brian K. Vaughan. Some of you know about it. It's from this fictional author, D. Oswald Heist, who plays an important role in the narrative. And he says, "Oh, I abhor real violence, but fake violence is fucking brilliant." Okay. So I like to call this the paradox of violence. Okay, why is it that we enjoy fake violence when we would not enjoy the same sort of situation in real life? And this actually goes back, as I start off with Aristotle, and this sort of question goes back to Aristotle, who thought about this in terms of tragedy, in terms of the ancient Greek art form of tragedy. I realize how ridiculous this is at the moment, but I'm the audience, so that's cool. So yeah, he was interested in the ancient Greek art form of tragedy, which his predecessor Plato hated. So Plato didn't get tragedy, or at least his teacher Socrates convinced him that poetry in general was no good, that art in general was no good, that it was a distraction. Why would you want to see these people suffering, acting in ways that are undignified? All that's going to do is cause people to copy it. All that's going to do is cause people to act that way, to become undignified, to act in ways that are not becoming of a virtuous person. So, Plato condemned tragedy. Aristotle thought, no, you don't get it, Plato. Tragedy actually has a pro-social benefit. And that benefit he called catharsis. So Aristotle said, when we watch something with a lot of horrible things happening, it arouses pity and fear in us to see a good person, to see bad things happen to a good person. So it arouses pity and fear in us, and we're able to get rid of our excess pity and fear by watching it. Or that's at least one way of thinking about what Aristotle meant by catharsis. So it's not, he thought, that we actually enjoy the pity and fear itself. We enjoy getting rid of it. And we enjoy the kind of narrative that allows us to do so. And in more recent years, because tragedy isn't really an art form anymore, but something similar is horror, is the genre of horror. So in philosophy, there's been a lot of literature on why we enjoy horror, why we want to see fictionally depicted scenes of horrible things happening again, even if you wouldn't want to see those things in real life. We would be horrified if there were real zombies eating real people, but when we watch The Walking Dead or whatever, or better, read the comic book, we enjoy it. What is it that we enjoy? Well, there's a whole bunch of different theories about why we enjoy horror. For instance, John Morreale says, well, we don't really enjoy the horrible things that we see, but seeing those things gives us an adrenaline rush, a sort of general state of physiological arousal, and we enjoy that. But we only enjoy it in the context of when it's controlled, when we have some control, when we know nothing really bad can actually happen to us. So for instance, if you're skydiving, that might be a great thrill until you realize that your parachute won't open, right? And then all of a sudden it's not fun anymore. So that's one theory. Another theory comes from Noel Carroll, who says, well, we don't really enjoy the horror, we enjoy learning about the monster. We enjoy the discovery process of finding out about the monster. And Susan Fagan thinks we don't like the horror, what we like is feeling good about agreeing with the morality of what we're looking at. So when bad things happen to bad people, and we're like, yeah, that's great, we congratulate ourselves that we have the right morals. When bad things happen to good people and we feel sympathy for them, we congratulate ourselves on, again, feeling the right way about the moral situation. But the thing about all of these theories is they sort of evade the issue. They don't say, we actually like the horror. They say we like something else about it that's connected to the horror. But I think we actually do like horror, and we actually do like fictional violence for itself. And so when it comes to violence, I think we need to think about, well, why is it that we actually like the fictional violence, not just something else that it gives us? Okay, so what's my answer to this question? Well, to begin with, I want to focus on professional wrestling, not just because I have a great interest in it in general, but because I think it's a really interesting case, because the assumption by all of these theories is that the violence is totally fictional, right? Is that we wouldn't like it if it was real, we do like it if it's fictional. But in professional wrestling, it's not exactly so clear. Because on the one hand, professional wrestling is like fiction. The outcomes are predetermined, and the people engaged in it aren't really trying to injure or hurt each other, really, or cause each other suffering. They want to create the illusion of that, or the appearance of that. But at the same time, if you tell a wrestling fan that wrestling is fake, likely they're going to tell you, well, yes, I know it's predetermined, but that shit really hurts. Okay, and that seems important to at least some wrestling fans, that it actually really hurts. Okay, so here we have a weird thing, because those same fans are not necessarily going to want to watch people really get hurt in real life, normally on the street, but it is sort of important to them that the wrestling at least hurts a little bit. So what's going on? And I think that gives us an opportunity to think about why we enjoy violence in general. Okay, so I think there's two different things going on. There's sort of two types of wrestling fans, and they're not mutually exclusive, and it's really a kind of a spectrum. But, so, I think there are four main reasons why we might really like to see fictional violence. One is that we really just like violence, and that we would like the real thing. So some people might be sadists, and they might just enjoy people suffering or just the appearance of people suffering. And there probably are some of those who are wrestling fans, and it might be true that everybody has a little sadist in them. So if it's, on wrestling a few months ago, on Monday Night Raw, this guy Hideo Itami did this move, the go to sleep, to this guy Brian Kendrick, and he really just crushed his face, for real, just smashed his face. And it was horrifying. And any wrestling fan I know isn't going to cheer for that. They're going to be like, oh no, he really got horribly hurt. But then again, if it were someone you really hated, I don't know, I'm sure some people in the room, quite a few people in the room, would want to see something like that happen maybe to the president. But, so we might have a little bit of sadism in some contexts. But in general, I don't think that's the main reason why people watch wrestling or like fictional violence in general. It's not that they're really sadists. The people who are really sadists pretty quickly leave wrestling and leave comic books and leave that kind of stuff and go on to things that are much more violent and then go on to real violence. The people who stay watching wrestling and reading comics, I don't think are in it to see people suffer. And so, I'm not a wrestler myself, so I can't speak directly to a wrestler's perspective. But I've read what a number of wrestlers have said about this sort of stuff. So Bret Hart, who was my favorite wrestler growing up, and is regarded by a lot of people as the greatest ever, says, what you want to do is get the maximum appearance of people getting hurt, of violence, while minimizing the actual damage to the wrestler. So that's what wrestlers are trying to do. They're trying to get the most appearance of violence for the least real violence. But that's not every wrestling. And particularly, there's a form of wrestling you might call hardcore wrestling or extreme wrestling. It was more popular in the 90s. So I don't know what.
Oh, I did not bring it back there.
It's on your jacket?
I think it's on the phone.
Okay. All right. I don't want to go too long. Okay, yeah, if you tell me when I'm gone for half an hour.
I sent a bunch of porn to your mom.
She's here, so that's.
Ding.
Oh boy. Okay. Where was I? Yeah. Hardcore wrestling. So in hardcore wrestling, the violence, at least the appearance of violence, is escalated. beyond what we would normally get. Nowadays, wrestling, at least mainstream wrestling, is not very hardcore at all. But especially in the 90s, there was this raising and raising and raising of the hardcore stakes. And the violence got so much, and at some point I was thinking like, well, if they keep going like this, someone's gonna die, right? And in fact, the wrestler Jerry the King Lawler, who had the whole thing with Andy Kaufman back in the 70s, he said, he knew that wrestling wasn't real when he was a kid, because he said if they were really trying to kill each other, then they'd all be dead by now. It was pretty clear that there weren't those kinds of consequences. So, okay, the greatest practitioner of hardcore wrestling, and probably the most eloquent spokesman for wrestling in general, is Mick Foley, aka Mankind, Dude Love, Cactus Jack, etc. And he's a New York Times bestselling author. His first autobiography was itself a bestseller. And he's spoken at MIT, he's written some novels, all that stuff. So he's probably, again, the most eloquent of any wrestlers who talk about their own experience. And he's known as the hardcore legend, the most hardcore of all wrestlers ever. And he lost an ear in Germany during a wrestling match. He was involved in matches in Japan with C4, with explosions, really gnarly stuff. And it hurt like hell. As he describes it in the book, it all hurt like hell. And he learned to do this hardcore style of wrestling because one day he took a crazy bump. He took a dive where he landed on his back on the concrete, and the whole crowd went, ooh. Right? So you can see there was a market for it. People wanted to see those kinds of crazy stunts. And throughout his career, they escalated and escalated. So the first thing I want to talk about, I want to use Foley as sort of an example to talk about these different ways that wrestling fans like the violence of wrestling. So the first thing was people who are actually sadists. But a second thing is that, but beyond just wanting people to suffer, there might be a reason why wrestling fans want wrestlers to feel pain, but don't want them to suffer. And what I mean by that is, part of wrestling, and this is especially true for Japanese wrestling, is a lot of it is about how much you can take, how much punishment you can take, how tough you are. So there's this sort of macho idolatry of those who are able to take a really hard slam or a really hard chop or something like that. So the Japanese wrestlers, they don't do anything to injure each other, but they, with their forearms and their chops and their kicks, they kind of beat the crap out of each other to some degree. Now, and so for the new recruits in Japanese wrestling, they have to get the crap beaten out of them for years before they sort of have worked up the cred to be able to dish some out themselves. Okay, so it's this weird kind of thing, and you might think that it's a bizarre kind of sexual sublimation or something like that, and we can talk about that later on. But it seems like, so that is another reason why you'd want wrestlers to really feel it, right? Because you respect them more for actually taking punishment. Another thing to point out about the sadism thing is that if you've ever seen a wrestling match where all of a sudden the wrestlers actually are trying to hurt each other, it's kind of horrifying. It takes you out of it. It's no longer something enjoyable, it's something shocking. So for example, it's weird because both recent examples were women for some reason, but there's plenty of examples of men. This one woman in Mexico, Sexy Star, broke this other woman's arm on purpose during a match, and she has since been blacklisted from wrestling. There was another example in Japan with Yoshiko and Act Yakasuka, where Yoshiko really, and you can see the video, all of a sudden it changes. You're no longer seeing fictional violence, and it's very clear that you're no longer seeing fictional violence. And so at least my feelings change very much. And if you've ever seen a wrestler get really horribly injured for real, the crowd generally reacts with sympathy, not cheering like, oh yeah, that was awesome, they got hurt. Okay, so now I want to sort of go over to the other kind of wrestling fan, or the other way in which wrestling fans enjoy the fictional violence of wrestling, which really is just for the fiction of it. And I think it speaks to some sort of basic instinctual impulses, things that we enjoy. So, for example, I have a friend who won't read comic books that don't have explosions. If there aren't any explosions, he's like, what's the point? You could draw anything you wanted to, and you didn't draw explosions. Right? Now, what is that, right? Why does he want to see, and he doesn't want to see real explosions, he wants to see drawn explosions. Well, and maybe he would want to see real explosions, but he wouldn't want people to actually be hurt by them and things like that. So if it was a controlled demolition or something, that's great. And you know, there's a place you can go to in the city where you can pay money to take objects like TVs and stereos and smash them, right? And get out your pent-up aggression smashing them. And again, I think this speaks, when you're a little kid, I think there's a glee in destruction, right? You see something, and you're able to exercise your will to affect reality in this really dramatic way when you knock something over or break something. And usually, you become socialized to not do that so often. Some people don't. But even if you're socialized to not do that so often, I think there's still a sort of latent desire, at least I'm speaking for myself, to destroy things. There is that sort of childish impulse of like, and I think we enjoy vicariously experiencing that, seeing things destroyed in the way that we would sort of deep down like to destroy them. So I think that's part of it. And there are certain qualities of the perceived violence that we like. One of them is excess. I think we have a drive to enjoy excess, to enjoy displays of excess. The semiologist Roland Garros actually wrote an article about pro wrestling in 1957. He's probably the only sort of canonical philosopher or anything like that who's written about wrestling. And he called it a spectacle of excess, where everything is bigger. The actions are as big and dramatic and broad as they can be. The characters, and this is why you get a lot of stereotypes, the characters are supposed to have their qualities just exaggerated and blown up. And I think Bart had actually a kind of limited view of what wrestling should be. For instance, he didn't like it when wrestling tried too hard to look real. He thought that wasn't the point. And he also thought that what we want out of wrestling is for the characters to perform exactly the actions we expect of them, to act out the roles that we already assigned to them. And again, that's going to involve a lot of stereotypes and things like that. And I think wrestling can do more than that. I think actually it doesn't need to follow these sort of prescribed patterns. But a really important thing about wrestling sometimes is that it's surprising. Right? So we want it to surprise us, we want it to be different. And we can also break all sorts of norms, and hopefully we'll get to talking about that a little bit soon. Okay. So the excess, yeah. The other thing that we like, besides the excess that I was just saying, is the overturning of social norms, of the normal social reality. One of the reasons why we like explosions in fiction is because we just don't see that many of them. Right? It's because explosions aren't a normal part of social reality, usually, hopefully. For us, at least here. There's plenty of parts in the world where explosions are a normal part of reality. And actually, I think that's really telling because, and Nietzsche, philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche said something about this when he was talking about the Greeks and saying that tragedy was at its height when Greek life was actually really good. And when Athens, at least, was at its peak of development. When Athens started to decline, comedy got big. And our art, I think, often represents the opposite of our lived experience, or what we want, what we desire out of lived experience. So it makes sense to me that hardcore wrestling was really big in the 90s, when life in America was actually fairly calm and not disruptive. Once 9/11 happens, and once we become much more aware of all the violence happening in the rest of the world, and it comes home, all of a sudden art gets less extreme, gets less hardcore, starts to get more tame and controlled, because people desire that kind of control and structure, perhaps. Speculation. But anyway, so we like that overturning of the social order, and violence is one thing that does that. And so I think it's really funny that the main weapons in wrestling are things like tables and chairs and ladders. Right? Everyday things in our experience that are then given a totally different use and a totally different meaning. Most wrestling fans don't chant, "We want blood." They chant, "We want tables." They chant, "We want tables." And the funny thing about tables, and I guess, again, I can't speak from the experience of the wrestlers, but just looking at it, the tables are super flimsy. They don't seem to hurt very much at all. If anything, they break someone's fall, so that it hurts less when you fall through a table than not falling. But wrestling fans love to see tables broken. And it is really sort of satisfying just to hear the crack and the calamity of it. But I think it's also like, if you're sitting there at work and you hate your boss and there's a table, you're like, oh man, I really wish I could put them through that table. And then in wrestling, they do it. They put their boss through a table, right? So that sort of, there was actually a guy named John Fisk in the 80s who compared wrestling to the theater theory of Bertolt Brecht, and said that what wrestling does is stimulate the viewer to produce self as spectacle identity that counters the social identities proposed by the dominant ideology. So for instance, the dominant ideology has it that bosses are in control of their workers. Well, Stone Cold Steve Austin, the wrestler, beats the crap out of his boss, right? And then drinks beer in the ring and overturns every sort of norm of normal society. Okay. Back to Foley. I feel like I'm going too long, and I want Geoff to. I'm really, really honored to be sharing this lecture with Geoff.
You suck.
I'll get you later. I'll see you in the cage. All right.
Thumbtacks.
Oh yeah. Well, we'll get to thumbtacks. Right. So thumbtacks, right? Another one. Thank you. Yeah. Another just normal office supply that is then used. I mean, and there's something. The guy falls on the thumbtacks. He's not wearing a shirt. He gets up and they're all sticking in his back, and there's these tiny little pinpricks of blood. I don't know. It's kind of, it has a beauty to it, right? It's excess. It's a weird thing that you never see, and it's a spectacle of it. They get the camera right on the back with the tiny little droplets of blood coming down from the thumbtacks. All right. So Mick Foley, when he was going through this escalation of hardcore, and the escalation is a really important part. One of the functions that violence has in wrestling is narrative. As a feud, as a rivalry becomes more and more heated, the matches have to be more and more violent to express that hatred that the wrestlers feel for one another. So Mick Foley is escalating and escalating, and he's doing these hardcore matches, and then one day he looks into the crowd, and one of the fans is holding a sign that says Kane Dewey. So Dewey was Foley's, I think, 8-year-old son. He has his age here, I forget. A 3-year-old son. So Dewey was Foley's 3-year-old son that somehow the fans learned about. I think he might have mentioned it in the promo or something. And the Kane part was because they used these big bamboo, they're called kendo sticks, really. These big bamboo sticks to hit each other with. They make a great sound when you hit someone with them. But they called it a Singapore cane, because at the time it was all in the news that people were getting caned for doing graffiti in Singapore. Okay, so they were capitalizing on that, right? And look, the ECW fans definitely had tons of sadists, okay? The ECW fans of that time, I don't think it was true of all the fans, but there are also the fans who like the kind of hardcore wrestling nowadays, the CZW wrestling, that is mostly people cutting each other up, and, you know, real barbed wire and things like that. But yeah, so the fans really were bloodthirsty in ECW, and they were really calling for more and more violence. And Foley he saw the Cane Dewey sign, right? Where they were talking about caning his 3-year-old son, and he was starting to think, maybe this is going too far. And so he decided to do something different with his character. He decided to stop being hardcore. He decided to put on a suit and tie and not do anything hardcore in his matches, have as boring matches as possible to get a reaction out of the fans. Really, the reason why he was doing it was so that he would become a bad guy and this other guy, Tommy Dreamer, could be the big hardcore hero who says, no, I'm going to keep doing the hardcore stuff. And Foley had left his job at WCW, a way more lucrative job, to go wrestle in ECW and be hardcore. So he had made real sacrifices for it. And Tommy Dreamer had, I don't know if he really had or they just made it up, had turned down an offer from WCW as well. So I'm just going to read this one promo from Mick Foley where he really brings this all home. I'm going to take you back to a very deciding point in my life. A time when I believed in something. A time when I thought that my face and my name made a difference. Do you remember the night, Tommy Dreamer? Because it's embedded in my skull. It's embedded in my heart. It's embedded in every nightmare that I will ever have. As Terry Funk took a broken bottle and began slicing and dicing Cactus Jack. The pain was so much that, I'll be honest with you, Tommy, the pain was so much that I wanted to say, I quit, Terry Funk. I give. I wave the flag, and I'm a coward. Just please don't hurt me anymore. Then I saw my saving grace. You see, Tommy, I looked out in that audience, my adoring crowd, and I saw two simple words that changed my life. Cane Dewey. Somebody had taken the time and the effort and the thought to make a sign that said Cane Dewey. And I saw other people around as every moment in my life stopped and focused on that sign, and the pain that shot through my body became a distant memory, replaced by a thought which will be embedded in my skull until my dying day. Cane Dewey. Cane Dewey. Dewey Foley is a 3-year-old little boy, you sick sons of bitches. You ripped out my heart, you ripped at my soul, you took everything I believed in, and you flushed it down the damn toilet. You flushed my heart, you flushed my soul, and now it sickens me to see other people making the same mistake. You see, Tommy Dreamer, I have to listen to my little boy say every day, Daddy, I miss Georgia. That's where WCW was. And I say, that's too bad, son, because your dad traded in the Victorian house for a sweatbox on Long Island. Your dad traded in a $100,000 contract, guaranteed money, insurance, respect, and the name of the dotted line of the greatest man in the world to work for a scumbag who operates out of a little pissin' pawn shop in Philadelphia. You don't expect me to be bitter? Tommy, when you open up your heart, when you open up your soul and it gets shit on, it tends to make Jack a very mean boy. And so I say to you, before I take these aggressions out on you, to look at your future and realize that the hardcore life is a lie. That these letters behind me are a blatant lie. That those fans who sit there and say, he's hardcore, he's hardcore, he's hardcore, wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire, you selfish son of a bitch. But I want you to understand, Tommy, though he's hurt you time and time again, Raven wants you to understand that the hatred I have in here is not for you. No, far from it. You see, Tommy, I'm not doing this because I hate you, I love you, man. I only want the best of you. But when I hear that WCW called up your number and you said no thank you, well, it makes my blood run cold. As cold as that night in the ECW arena. And so I got a moral obligation, you see, Tommy. I'm on a path of righteousness, and righteous men wield a lot of power. So if I've got to drag you by your face to that telephone and dial collect and say, hello, Eric, it's me, Cactus, and though I know I've burned my bridge, I'll never be taken back with open arms, I've got a wrestler who would gladly trade in his ECW shirt for a pair of green suspenders. And Tommy, just think of that sound in your ear when Uncle Eric says, welcome home, Tommy Dreamer. So Foley has this ambivalence toward the audience. And it's part of the show. It's part of getting Tommy Dreamer over as a good guy, but I think he was also really feeling it. The thing he's known best for is this Hell in a Cell match, when he's thrown off of the cage and falls through a table, when he's thrown through the top of the cage, and was horribly injured by it. And a lot of people think of that as the height of Foley's career. But when you read about it in the book, he says, no, that wasn't the height of my career. People were already forgetting me at that point. People were into people like The Rock, who had catchphrases, right? They didn't care about the hardcore cred anymore. The wrestling fans wanted something different. They wanted their excess. They wanted their overturning of social norms, not really to be violence necessarily anymore, but to be something else. And when you see in independent wrestling in the early 2000s, I remember noticing there was this organization, Ring of Honor, which was almost completely non-hardcore. Especially the fans didn't like the hardcore. They wanted things to be about respect and sort of about morality and about athleticism. And there was actually a war sort of between the two groups of fans. So I sort of want to end just by saying, for instance, in Ring of Honor, there was this guy, Paul London, and whenever he was about to do a crazy stunt that looked like it could be terribly dangerous, the crowd didn't chant, like, do it, or we want blood, or he's hardcore. They chanted, please don't die. And it's very different sentiment coming from the Ring of Honor fans. So what I want to say is, I think professional wrestling and a lot of these art forms have evolved. And fictional violence can be great. It can be a great way of sort of giving us this aesthetic satisfaction. But as it develops, I think that aesthetic satisfaction we're getting it from other things. We're getting it from excesses of athleticism, of complicated layouts and matches, and of overturning other sorts of social norms, such as gender and sexuality, which wrestling is really just beginning to come to terms with. So yeah, I want to give it over to Geoff at this point, and we can talk about some other things. But
I should say you suck, but that was really good. I'm not a good bad guy wrestler. That was really good. I'm supposed to say terrible things about you now. Also, I'm sorry I said
we are going to fight after this.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. I should say, as a preamble here, I don't know shit about wrestling. Am I supposed to use this?
I tried to use it, but then it didn't seem to be doing anything.
All right, I'm taking it out. All right. So, I don't know shit about wrestling. The only thing I know about wrestling is I watched all of Glow and loved it. It's so good. It's so good. And I saw Darren Aronofsky's The Wrestler, in which if you want to talk about wrestlers suffering like he's Christ, it's pro wrestler as Jesus is what that movie is about, and it's real good. And Darren Aronofsky's a genius. And then there's a Mountain Goats album called Beat the Champ that was playing about wrestling that was playing before this started. And then I saw a lot of Slim Jim commercials in the mid 1980s. So, but I do know a lot about a kind of related area, which is superhero comic books and supervillains, right? There's a kind of, in terms of dressing up in ludicrous, outrageous outfits and inflicting violence on people, it's a very similar kind of, the Venn diagram starts to kind of overlap. So I'm interested in looking at that, and it's actually the close. That's exactly where I want to get started, because I think a lot of times, especially academics, have a really bad habit of avoiding. They go, oh, that's just the surface. Let's talk about the subtext, right? What's going on underneath? One of my favorite movies has a conversation in it where this guy says, I've been hearing a lot lately about, it's from this movie called Barcelona that nobody saw by Whit Stillman. It's great. And he says, I've been hearing a lot lately about this subtext, which I take to be a kind of hidden meaning or message that's sort of underneath plays and novels and poems and things. He says, what do you call the thing above the subtext? He goes, the text. Okay, that's right, but nobody ever talks about that. And it's true, nobody ever talks about it. They skip ahead. And my favorite little joke about this is a story about a guy who steals there's a guy who works at a factory, and he's accused of stealing. And every day, and they know he's stealing, but they can't figure out how he's doing it. And every day, he exits the factory, and he's got a wheelbarrow, and they check the wheelbarrow, and there's nothing in there, and they let him go. And of course, the joke is that it turns out he's stealing wheelbarrows, right? But you look right past the thing, and then you can't, it's so obvious and in your face that you actually look right past it. So I'm interested in that kind of surface thing. And one of my favorite quotes about art is somebody asked Andy Warhol, they said, what's the meaning of your art? And he said, it's decorative, which is a great response. Andy Warhol's a genius. So I wanted to kind of look at the outfits as the starting point. The idea, because I think it's the sort of fashion, it's the fashionableness, it's the fashion and the style. It's not, we shouldn't just erase the style and go, well, what's really going on underneath the nonsense style? The style is the essence, right? It's what John Ashbery says. It's not superficial. It's a visible core. So I want to start looking at supervillains and tie it into wrestling every once in a while. Can somebody hand these out? I forgot to do this. Give me one on the top. Thank you. I'm not a good bad guy wrestler. And I want to start off with Nietzsche talking about Shakespeare's Macbeth. I always try to tie everything back into Shakespeare and Batman. That's my superpower. So Shakespeare, so Nietzsche writes this piece about Shakespeare's Macbeth. And you know Macbeth, he wants to be king, so he kills the king, and then he kills a whole bunch of other people, and then he goes crazy and dies after his wife commits suicide. It's great. Shakespeare's best play, by the way, the very best one. So Nietzsche writes, whoever thinks that Shakespeare, because he's responding to a lot of Victorian people who are saying, so what's the lesson of Macbeth? Don't be too ambitious, right? Macbeth wants to be king, and that causes his whole life to get destroyed. So Nietzsche writes, whoever thinks that Shakespeare's theater has a moral effect and that the sight of Macbeth irresistibly repels one from the evil of ambition is in error. And he is again in error if he thinks Shakespeare himself felt as he feels. He who is really possessed by a raging ambition beholds this image with joy, the image of Macbeth slaughtering people in order to gain power. And if the hero perishes by his passion, this is precisely the sharpest spice in the hot draft of this joy. Can the poet have felt otherwise? How royally, and not at all like a rogue, does this ambitious man pursue his course from the moment of his great crime. Only from then on does he exercise demonic attraction and excite similar natures to emulation. Demonic means here, in defiance against life and advantage, for the sake of a drive and idea. And then he mentions Tristan and Isolde. I don't give a shit about Tristan and Isolde. But Romeo and Juliet, right? Romeo and Juliet, spoiler alert, they die, right? And you go, well, what's the moral of the story? Well, I guess the moral of the story is they should have loved more moderately, and they should have waited and not been in such a rush. There's no way you could possibly read the complete works of Shakespeare and be like, yeah, that was his point. We love Romeo and Juliet precisely because they go too fast and die in the process, not in spite of it. And so these stories often work. There's like an official version of the story, and then there's what people get out of it. Similarly, Scarface and The Godfather, I'm pretty sure, are supposed to be terrible stories, sad stories about Michael Corleone. He stays away from, he gets sucked into his family, and he didn't want to do all that stuff. He just wanted to be a regular guy, and they pull him into a life of crime against his wishes, and then by the end of the movie, he closes the door on his wife, right? He's alienated from the woman he loves, and it's depressing, and it's sad, and everybody watches that movie, and they go, yeah, kill them all! They're so excited to Michael Corleone to execute all his enemies. They're missing, it's sad that he does that. That's him irreversibly entering into the criminal world. Similarly with Scarface. I think it's a tragic story about a guy who tried to have too much and got just, but we love the fact that he gets destroyed and everybody puts him on the backs of jackets and they love Scarface. He's cool. So he says to think that Shakespeare is against love or against excess would be to stand the poets on their head. They, and especially Shakespeare, are enamored of the passions as such, and not the least of their death-welcoming moods. Those moods in which the heart adheres to life no more firmly than does a drop of water to a glass. I'm skipping ahead. The tragic poet has just as little desire to take sides against life with his images of life. He cries rather it is the stimulant of stimulants, this exciting, changing, dangerous, gloomy, and often sun-drenched existence. It is an adventure to live. Espouse what party in it you will, it will always retain this character. He speaks out of a restless, vigorous age, which is half drunk and stupefied by its excess of blood and energy, and out of a wickeder age than ours, which is to say why we need to first adjust and justify the goal of Shakespearean drama. That is to say, not understand it. And we similarly don't understand villains in stories, and we similarly don't understand villains in wrestling. So what I want to look at is to think about the performative nature of it, excess. Ben used the word excess, but right, William Blake has a great quote where he says, "Excess is beauty," and it's the aesthetic dimension, it's the beauty dimension, the style dimension, the fashion dimension that's really important about these guys. So And for Nietzsche, it's audacity and vitality, right? Extravagance. By the way, the VAG in extravagance is the same VAG that's in vagrant, because they both mean to cross borders. The vagrant has no home and wanders from place to place with no borders, no edges, no containment. If you are extravagant in your spending, you don't contain your spending. You spend and you spend. So the three things, though, I want to look at the villains and really talk about sort of the fashionableness in a couple of categories. So the supervillain is very fashionable. Right? Outlandish outfits are a key part of and a superhero identity as well. And of course, you've all seen those stories where the villain goes to the hero, "You and me, we're the same." That's like because they're mirror images of each other or whatever. Will Graham becomes Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter, basically. But the idea of the fashionable villain. Now, the fashionable villain, by the way, I'm a huge nerd for etymologies. The VILL in villain is the same VILL in village. It means low-born, low class, dirty. Shakespeare characters frequently use the word villain not to mean evil, but to mean sort of shitty. Like you're just crummy. You villain. It's like an insult because they're low-down dogs or something. So the villain... but a lot of our favorite supervillains they react against this and go super duper high class, right? So I'm thinking particularly of Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter, right? Who has humble origins but wears these beautiful suits, particularly in the Brian Fuller show. The movies really weren't able to capture that at all. Lex Luthor is often shown in these sort of beautiful suits. My favorite detail in any superhero movie is in Superman 3. It's a tiny little throwaway detail, but we are told that Lex Luthor has never worn the same pair of socks twice, and it's so good. And the outfits are really crucial to what the villains are. Darth Vader, for example, right? He is the outfit. When they took him out of the outfit, nobody wanted to see that. And there's a great line in Night at the Opera 2. No, not Night at the Museum 2, which is a real movie starring Ben Stiller. But Hank Azaria is in it, and I think he plays like a pharaoh or something. And he meets Darth Vader because they're doing product placement and they're connecting. This is how they sell movies to people or whatever, museums. So he sees Hank Azaria's character sees Darth Vader, and Vader comes in with the cool entrance and the bum bum bum. And Hank Azaria says, "Is that you breathing? Because I can't hear myself think." And then he says, "There's too much going on here. You're asthmatic, you're a robot, and what's with the cape? Are we going to the opera? I don't think so." But to point out that Vader is wearing an opera cape, right? I mean, this is a ridiculous outfit with it's cool and it's badass, but there's something kind of foppish and dandyish about he doesn't need a cape. It's not doing anything, right? It's literally just there so he can have a badass entrance. The villains, and Vader's a character who seems to not care what other people think. But oh my God, the cape, right? It's like in the 80s when people were very stressed out by punks, these dangerous punks with the piercings and the big hair. But when you think about the amount of time it requires to fix your hair up like that, it kind of deflates the dangerousness of the image a little bit, right? These are extensions of the dandy and the fop and the clothes horse, right? It's in a different mode, but it's the same fundamental thing. And supervillains and wrestlers with their outrageous outfits are in the same kind of arena. Wilson Fisk from Daredevil is a character, again, low-born in origin, very, very high class now. And he spends a lot of time looking at abstract art. That's how you know you're dealing with a villain, because they like abstract art. Right? Heroes like art to be about something, and villains like the art to be an end in and of itself. And I'm going to connect that and make a serious point about that in a minute. If you collect those abstract paintings, who likes those? Bad guys. So, and part of the outfits is with the action figure industry, right? That when you get Batman, they make a little Batman plastic guy, right? And then they want to sell that same figure to you again. So they paint him a different color, and they go, "It's jungle Batman, so we can hide in the jungle." It's the same fucking thing. You just put a different coat of paint on it. It's Arctic Batman. It's the same. You just painted it white. But they make you buy the same thing. The comic book industry is designed to get you to buy the same thing 3 or 4 times. You get the comic book, and then you get the trade, and then you get the special edition hardback thing, and then same thing with the action figures. You buy the same thing over and over again. And in the comic book industry, especially with supervillains, you can't invent anything new, right? None of the movies have a new character, right? What they do is they get an old character that nobody cares about, like Bane, and they reinvent him, and that's style. Right? Fundamentally, the difference between the Joker in the 1989 Batman movie and the Heath Ledger Joker and the Jared Leto? I don't want to talk about that. But it's style, right? It's 3 different Jokers in 3 different styles, right? So style is fundamental to the villain, and the fashion it's crucial to how it is. And even when the villains Somebody used to think somebody like Darth Vader doesn't care what people, like they don't care what, they dress however they want, they do whatever they want, they don't care what people think of them. But of course it's a great line in Game of Thrones where Tywin Lannister says to his son says, I don't care what people think of me. And he says, that's what you want people to think of you. Right, so there's no way to really get out of this kind of paradox of being cool. And supervillains, and all the supervillains have this kind of quality. One of my favorite superhero lines is in X-Men 2. In X-Men 1, Rogue was trapped by Magneto into this machine, and it put a white stripe in her hair. She still has it in X-Men 2. When they team up with Magneto, he's in the back of the X-Men's jet. And he's looking over at Rogue, and he attacked her and kidnapped her, and she looks at him, and he's sort of talking to Mystique, and he says, "Oh, we love what you've done with your hair," and it's an emphasis on fashion with the bad guys. The other thing that's fashionable is the violence. The violence is of a particular type. It's a fancy, fashionable violence, and what I mean by fashionable violence is it's overtly theatrical. It uses the kinds of It's theatrical, not just in the sense that it's big and you pay attention to it, but like theater, it's to send a message, right? It's violence as communication. And it uses all of the. Doesn't tell a story, but it uses some of the same techniques that we associate with poetry. Violence in movies and with supervillains is often ironic. Oh, you died. You stabbed me in the back metaphorically. So, right? It's a metaphorical violence all through these kinds of movies. Or it's ironic violence, right? It's the opposite of what you wanted. It's some kind of trick. Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter, for example, will often kill people, and like whatever they were doing wrong, he's tied into how he's killed them. And he'll come up with these sort of elaborate artistic tableaus in the television show. He's literally like making art out of bodies. But you might think about, and of course, in Silence of the Lambs, the guy is killing people in order to make a skin suit. Right, he's literally sewing skin together with a sewing machine. Right, the fashion is central to that, so the violence is often ironic. It's often metaphorical. It's very performative. And think about the 1989 Joker, where the violence, he goes into an art museum and starts wrecking the paintings. Right, he starts. It's big, and he wants to do it in a parade, so everyone's watching. Villains always want to do things on TV. There's always a scene in these movies where a bunch of people are, because apparently people in these movies, they always get their news from like a Radio Shack, right? Like even in a modern movie, there's like a Radio Shack that has like 6 TVs and like 12 people are like huddled around. Like I feel like I saw a recent movie. It was ridiculous that like because they're just playing the news, I guess. Which all right. I mean, I shouldn't. I mean, I get all my news from the gym because I don't want to watch TV with news on it. But then at the gym, I'm like, ugh. And I was like, oh, it's breaking news. And then after I went to the gym enough, I realized it's always breaking news. That's the trick. So the violence is often metaphorical. It's crowd-pleasing, like the Joker. And it's very performative. It's meant to teach lessons, right? There's all this kind of, you can save your girlfriend, or you can save the district attorney of Gotham City. And I think I combined Bane and the Joker. These impressions are very sketchy impressions. But then there's a little bit drunk Orson Welles, right? This Chardonnay. I can't, right? I don't know. So they're crowd pleasing, and it's not. And one of the things is it's not random. One of the violence in our real life is often random. That guy that shot up all those people at the music concert, which one? But the kind of a lot of the mass murders we see, we never found out why that guy did that at all, right? The guy that shot, I don't know, Vegas. I'm thinking of the Vegas one, right? That guy with the machine. I mean, who can keep them all straight? It's America's pastime. But the violence of that was never explained. Now the Joker, you think, well, that's like the Joker because he's all about random violence. But of course, the Joker's trying to teach you a lesson, which is that the world is really random. So the violence isn't random. The violence is designed to teach you a lesson. It's theater. The theatrical villain in the theatrical outfit is teaching you kinds of the lessons about this stuff. All right. And actually, if I can go back to one thing, because I skipped one of my bullet points that I want to go back to. Scott Bukatman wrote this book about superheroes, and he said this really important quote. He said that and he says it about superheroes, but it's true of villains as well. He says superheroes don't dress up in fabulous outfits so that they can fight crime. They fight crime so they can dress up in fantastic outfits, right? Or give lectures, right? Yeah. But it's an excuse to sort of do this other thing, this sort of fashionable. The supervillain is the same thing. He wants to wear these elaborate, crazy outfits. And one thing I want to move to now is something, and again, I don't know a lot about wrestling, and Ben's going to jump in and correct me with all kinds of stuff, but theoretically, at some point, right, wrestling was about actual combat, right? Like you were trying to defeat somebody in the real world in some distant caveman past, I imagine, right? And then they formalized it and put rules on it and turned it into a game. Once you have rules and a game and a set time you're going to do it, that means even Olympic wrestling is fundamentally performative. It's not like I'm going to walk up to somebody on the street and just put him in a suplex reverse. I don't know. I heard that in a song. I don't know what it is. So, and I did this, but I don't know what it is. Right, but like you're not just going to wrestling when I'm a wrestler. It doesn't mean you just jump on motherfuckers on the subway, right? It's showtime always. So that even when you're watching a wrestling match, even Olympic wrestling is fundamentally a performance. There's an audience, there are rules, there are times. It's just like a sonnet would have. Yeah, it has to be 14 lines, has to have rhymes here, here, and here. There's arbitrary constraints even in Olympic wrestling, and all pro wrestling does is just has different constraints, but it's not fundamentally different because they're both extensions of some natural thing where that guy has a sandwich that I want, so I just put him in a headlock until he passes out and take the sandwich, right? Ben's thinking about it. He'll give his rebuttal later. I got this, by the way, from one of my favorite little bits in Hamlet, is that Hamlet ends with a fencing match, right? And it's really interesting because, again, the fencing match is to take something. Originally, you'd be like, I'm going to fucking kill you with a sword, right? But then they were like, well, but then fencing, the sport, the Olympic sport, is fundamentally a performance. There's an audience and there are rules, et cetera, et cetera. But then Laertes is like, I'm going to fucking poison the swords. So he's taking the performance and making it real. But then, of course, you're in the audience, and none of this is real. That's not real poison, right? They poison in jest. So it's this. There's real sword fighting, which becomes fencing, which becomes real again when Laertes puts the poison on, which becomes fake again when you're here to watch it. And it's that kind of tricky flipping between the sort of real and performative levels that I think is really one of the most interesting things about the supervillain. Do you want to jump in?
Wrestling, yeah. So wrestling is all about sort of blurring the lines between the reality and the appearance. But also, so it has these constraints. It is this like simulation of combat. But a lot of the constraints are there to be broken, are there to be overturned, like the kind of norms that I was talking about before. So there are rules, right? But the wrestlers are always cheating. They're always breaking the rules. Right. And then there's like sort of different levels. Then there are the tropes of it that then get undermined as well.
But breaking the rules is yet another convention, right? It's part of it.
But then you'll have a wrestling match where they don't break the rules, and that's like a big part of it, and they've overturned that convention as well.
And this is true for real sports as well. Like I mean, in hockey, they're like, oh, you're not allowed to punch that guy in the face, penalty box. But like, fuck you. If you wanted these guys to stop hurting each other, you could definitely design a pretty simple system that would discourage them from attacking each other. The fact that you don't means that you want them to do that, right? The penalties are low enough that it's going to keep happening. You can adjust the penalties so it happens at an acceptable rate, right? Because you're playing, because it's a performance. Hockey is a performance, right? Again, the uniforms, the outfits, the audience, right? The rules, right? So that you can keep adjusting the dials on this because you want some violence, right? So you go, oh no, we're against it. But it's the same thing when you're like, oh, Romeo and Juliet, they went too fast. But you wanted them to go too fast. That was make Romeo and Juliet the best couple ever. So the breaking of the rules is itself built into the rules. It's another convention. So this idea of, so the villains, the fashion of the villains, they wear fashionable outfits and they perform fashionable violence, but they perform it for an audience. And this is a really, really crucial thing that villains do, is they're always thinking of an audience. Now someone like Vader does not appear to be thinking of an audience, but that cape though. Right, he's got the opera cape. So he's obviously, somebody designed that to look cool. And the thing about villains when they're communicating with the audience is there are degrees of breaking the fourth wall, right? You know, in theater, you got the wall here and the wall here and the wall behind you, and the fourth wall is this invisible one in front of you, and then if I talk to you directly, I've broken the fourth wall, right? So the breaking of the fourth wall, it's not simply an on-off position, like does the movie break the fourth wall or not? It's a degree issue. So, for example, Vader does not appear to be breaking the fourth wall at all, right? He's just wandering around using his lightsaber to kill people and sell action figures or whatever he does. So, somebody like the Joker is often performing the people of Gotham. I'm doing Bane. Okay, somebody like Bane, people of Gotham City. Is that it? That's it, right? Indian. Oh. People of Gotham City. Oh, that's it. That's right. People of Gotham City. Right, that's it. It is a little bit like drunk Sean Connery. Bane sounds exactly like Sean Connery as performed on Saturday Night Live parody Jeopardy. Your mother, Trebek, right? Suck it, Trebek, right? So the breaking of the so Joker's the Bane or whatever is performing for the audience of Gotham City, right? He's saying, "Look what I'm doing to you, and this is to teach you a lesson about whatever." I don't know what the fuck he's doing. So, but the point is that when he's performing for the people of Gotham City, that's in the story. But of course, you're the real audience, right? You came to see the movie, and when he performs and does these explosions to impress and fill the people of Gotham City with fear, it's really filling you, the audience, with delight. You are in many ways aligned with the people of Gotham City. Like them, there's a bunch of you. Like them, you're passive. You're sitting in the theater doing nothing. And you are the people of Gotham City. And that's why frequently in these movies, there's a scene where the Joker's like on television speaking to Gotham City, but then it becomes the movie screen and he's talking to you. So even when he's not, and the Joker's not aware of you. But it seems like he is sometimes because the way he performs for the people of Gotham City is the same way he performs for you. Now, you don't think about somebody like Macbeth doing that at all, but he does. The most famous speech in Macbeth and the most famous speech in all of Shakespeare is tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow. A poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage. You're watching a stage, right? He seems aware at that moment. He compares himself to an actor walking around on a stage, and he concludes by saying life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury and signifying nothing. He's talking about the author of the play he's currently in, and he's aware of being on a stage. So again, he's not really aware of you, but he kind of is. Hamlet also has many moments of being kind of aware that you're there. When he's dying, he says to the people around him, "You that are but mutes or audience to this act." You're the audience. You're watching him, but he's talking to the people he can see. But he can kind of see you. So there are degrees of breaking the fourth wall. My favorite supervillain of all time, and I apologize to those of you who haven't seen this. It's old. You should have seen it already. But I have to. The only way to tell you that it's a supervillain and one of the top 5 is to spoil the movie. So I'm sorry. Amazing Amy Dunn from Gone Girl is truly one of the greatest supervillains, and the fact that she's not included is like number 3 on every supervillain list is pure sexism. But Amy Dunn is amazing, and if you've seen Gone Girl, what makes her truly villainous is the way that she is able to perform for the media. She has studied crime novels, but she's also studied real-life TV about men whose wives have been killed and how she can manipulate television to her advantage. Just like the Joker gets on TV and announces he's going to blow something up. Amazing Amy Dunn, God bless her, is able to kind of completely take over the airwaves and control the story. And this is what a good villain does. He controls the story. Iago, the villain from Othello, Iago is stage managing everything. He's like a director. He says, okay, I'm going to make Othello think this is happening, and actually, Othello, you stand over here. Cassio, come tell me about your girlfriend, Desdemona. And Cassio goes on, and he's getting Cassio to talk so that Othello will overhear him, so that Othello will think that Cassio is cheating with Othello's wife. But he's stage managing all of this. And the other thing, and the thing that makes him an amazing stage manager is he's talking directly to you, the audience, right? Shakespeare's characters often give these soliloquies, which are maybe in their head, but also seem partly delivered directly to you. When they do voiceover in a movie, it often seems like it's just them thinking. But on a stage, you got Hamlet saying, there's a performance of Hamlet, and he says, am I a coward? And somebody in the audience went, yes! But he seems to be talking directly to you, the audience. But Iago actually is brainstorming in front of you ideas about how he is going to destroy Othello, just like the Joker gets on the news or performs for the people of Gotham City. But Iago takes it farther and talks directly to you, the audience. And by the way, the Othello, it's a little bit apocryphal. I don't know. Othello is one of the people say that it's one of the most interrupted performances of Shakespeare. or plays of any kind. People get very upset about it. Now, obviously, in the 1600s, right, you got stories about just people weeping really hard when Desdemona dies, of course. But by the 1700s, you've got people fainting, right? This is really getting to the audience. But in the 19th century, in a performance of Othello in South Carolina, a woman yelled at the stage as Othello was about to kill Desdemona to yell, "She didn't do it, she's innocent." But we all understand that, right? How many horror movies have we seen where you're like, "Turn around, motherfucker!" Right? And he's coming right behind you. And oftentimes, by the way, horror movies the modern ones have a character in there who says that for you. Right, there's a character in that, like Scream, for example, where they're constantly discussing the horror movie as a genre, just like you would. Cabin in the Woods I'm not getting into that because it's amazing. But has a character who's constantly like Chris Hemsworth says, "We should split up," and he goes, "Really?" Right, because he's seen a fucking movie, unlike the fucking Walking Dead, where they've never seen a zombie movie. They don't know what they fucking are, and I hate it. I hate it so fucking much because Iago aligns you with him. You're like him. You want to watch this guy suffer, don't you? That's what you came here for, you fucking sadists. But on The Walking, so you're like Iago, but you're nothing like the people in The Walking Dead because you've seen a fucking zombie movie and they haven't. Which is why, right? Because that disconnects you from the audience. The audience is not like you. They don't even know what a fucking they don't even use the word zombie. Whereas you'd be like, "Oh shit, like that movie," right? And they never do that. In 1822, there was a performance in France of Othello. Actually, I'm not sure it was France. I need to double check that. No, it's France. In 1822, there's a performance of Othello, and Othello is going to kill Desdemona, and there's a guard at the door with a gun, meaning the door of the theater. And he says, "I'll be damned if some," and then he used a racial epithet, "will kill a white woman in my presence," and he fucking shot the actor playing Othello, breaking his arm. Right? So this is the fourth wall is being radically broken, right? And in particular, it's getting broken in, and wrestling provides a situation in which the barrier is so permeable that a character can take your chair and smash Ben's stupid face, right? I'm sorry, I can't be a bad guy wrestler. I feel bad I said that now. Okay. So the performative aspect of it is degrees, right? Vader doesn't seem to care, but he wears a cape. The Joker says, "I'm going to demonstrate this to Gotham City," but it's really to you. Macbeth seems like he knows he's on a stage, and Amy manipulates the media just like she manipulates your emotions. Oh, and the monologue, the classic villain monologue, right? We always have this. This is a trope people love to make fun of, right? Oh, the villain that won't shut up, and that's why. But who's the fucking monologue for? It's for you, right? He's performing either for the hero, right, but also for you, and it's a big show. People are like, my students are always like, "Why does he just fucking kill him?" But he's doing a performance, and it's not just a stupid thing that should be revised out of the genre. The performative aspects are central to what makes these characters work. And people that don't understand the monologue thing, it's like people who don't understand that Superman can wear glasses and people can't tell people think that's stupid. People think it's stupid that people can't tell the difference between Clark Kent and Superman, but let me tell you a story. One time, you can look this up. One time, Dolly Parton lost a Dolly Parton lookalike contest. So Superman makes perfect fucking sense, right? It's the wheelbarrow. You look right past it, right?
Is that where that Cheech and Chong thing came from?
I have no idea.
Where all of Amsterdam thinks that they're Burt Reynolds and Dolly Parton?
I have no idea. And my favorite example of this performative thing is in another movie I'm going to spoil, but it's old and you've had time. And it's a movie that a lot of people don't want to watch because it's torture porn, and it's not everybody's favorite. It's not my favorite genre, but this is a special one. It's called Funny Games. Some of you are nodding. You've seen Funny Games. Funny Games you talk about Nietzsche's talking about audacity in performance, right? But Funny Games has surely the most audacious thing I've really ever seen in any movie, almost. It's completely bonkers. Funny Games is a movie about two assholes, they seem like they're semi-upper class, and they break into a kind of upper-class suburban house, lake house, and they torture the inhabitants and make them miserable and fuck with them for hours. If you've seen The Strangers, it's just like The Strangers, or if you've seen any of these home invasion, torture the family movies, it's that. But Funny Games does something real interesting. About an hour, 10 minutes into the movie, Naomi Watts, who has seen horrible things and her children tortured and hurt, and she's been tortured and her husband's tortured and hurt, she finally gets the upper hand. And she leaps and she grabs a shotgun from one of the two people holding her hostage, and I don't know why I'm going after you all the time, and he shoots him right in the chest, right? At which point, in a move justified by absolutely nothing you have seen before, completely out of left field, there's no way you could even guess something like this would happen. The other torturer dives across the room, grabs the TV remote control, hits rewind, and the whole movie rewinds, and then she goes for the gun again, but this time he stops her. The movie continues on, never making reference to that scene. No one else is aware that it happened, and nothing before it or after it serves to contextualize or justify that completely bonkers moment. But it has this sort of, it's communicating with you, the audience. This is a movie, and I can fucking turn it back around again, right? Because the villains see life as a performance, right? That's why the bad guys in movies love art. Because you can do whatever you want in art. What they want to do is do what you do in art to actual human beings. The novelist tortures all of his characters. But the serial killer is like, oh, I'm going to treat people like that. And many of the serial killers turn people into inanimate objects, not just dead bodies, but lamps and soap, and people do that, right? I don't know. Or they eat them, they turn them to food or whatever. That's not a good example. But they do terrible things to people, and they sort of turn them into objects because they're treating life as itself a performance. The villains are, the fashionable outfits are intimately connected to the fashionable communicative violence, which is intimately connected to performing for an audience and to seeing life as a constant performance where there's no more at stake than there would be. Hurting people in the real world is the same as hurting people in a novel because it's all of a piece, and it's this constant sense of performance and style in everything that they do. And now I'm done.
You told me.
I was wondering if you thought this. Hello. So at the beginning, you talked about Plato's theory that art actually makes you enact, immoral actions, right? And you see this very much echoed today when they talk, like Trump talks about, or the right frequently talks about violent video games, our culture of violence, perpetuating mass shootings. Do you think there is any merit to Plato's thesis here that violence does something to you, desensitizes you, puts you? I don't necessarily agree with it. I'm just curious if you can speak more to it.
I really don't know. I mean, it's a really complicated question, and the data doesn't give us the data doesn't really give us a clear answer, so far at least. It seems to me, at least as someone who enjoyed a lot of violence as a kid, that you need the right kind of context, and you need to really know that it's really not real, right? That and not just that what you're looking at isn't real, but that life isn't really like this. And I think, having the right upbringing, the right other kinds of influences allow you to have that kind of context. And without it, I mean, if that's the main thing that you're absorbing, and you're not coming to understand that the world isn't really like this, then I can see how it could then, work its way into your real life. I guess, I don't know, that's the best I can do, I suppose. Anyone else have?
So, I was wondering a bit of your thoughts on, I think it's CZW, Tournament of Death?
Yes.
So, because you kind of talked so much about, and I've been to this, which is terrifying, and I love, fake real wrestling the whole bit. So that's kind of like that line of I feel like the people that are there really want to see people get hurt.
Right. So yeah, I was sort of speaking to that at the beginning, saying I think the sadistic fans who stay with wrestling stay with that kind of wrestling. But that's not to say that everybody who enjoys that wrestling enjoys it for sadistic reasons. But there is something to that, and it's the kind of thing where I remember the first time I saw a barbed wire match between Terry Funk and Sabu, I thought, that's crazy that they're doing that, and that's kind of amazing that they're willing to take those risks, and I had kind of respect for it, but I never really wanted to see it again. Just recently, I watched another barbed wire match between Joey Janela and David Starr. And it was an interesting story because it was their feud had gotten so heated that it needed to have that sort of violent outcome. But also, this was Joey Janela's hardcore swan song, because he's a guy who's done well enough at non-hardcore wrestling that he doesn't have to do that anymore. And that's actually something that I was going to say about Mick Foley. When he talks about Hell in the Cell, he did that crazy shit in Hell in the Cell because he was afraid the fans wouldn't like the match if he didn't. This was the sequel to the Shawn Michaels Undertaker Hell in the Cell match. And Shawn Michaels is a much more athletic guy. He could do all this crazy stuff. And Mick Foley's career was actually sort of on the decline at the moment. And he's like, I have to do something really big, or else, in order to keep the fans' respect, in order to stay relevant, stay in the conversation. And then he realized he didn't have to do it. Then he came up with all this funny stuff, like the Sacco and all this comedy stuff with The Rock, and that's actually made him a much bigger star than the hardcore stuff ever did. And that's happening with Joey Janela as well. He doesn't have to do it anymore. But they told a really interesting story because they have the barbed wire match. David Starr wins, and he gets on the mic and he says, yeah, I told you that guy was just a garbage wrestler, piece of shit. Like, I beat him at his own game, and you people loved it, and that makes me sick. And it's this great heel promo, and he's going to walk out. So, you can use it in the right sort of way. But the thing about CZW is that's all it is. And at a certain point, it's like, yeah, you see the train wreck. You can't look away from it the one time. But if you pass the train wreck every day, you'd probably stop looking eventually. So, yeah.
I have a question for both of you all. Oh, cool.
Okay, question for both of you all. Something that you were both making me think of in different ways was cosplay. So when people dress up as characters, I'm sure they dress up as wrestling characters. I've never seen it, but I guess
Sort of doing that right now.
yeah, no, you're both kind of cosplaying at the moment.
Right.
So something that I've been trying to think about for the past few months and I haven't figured out an answer is, why do people cosplay? Why?
We have a costume.
As a second person.
It's identification.
I don't understand why.
Serious identification.
Well, why do you cosplay?
I just we don't have. I guess as somebody who's really into anime and video games, we don't really have a chance to meet those people. Like, if you love Jason Statham, he's a real human and you can probably go somewhere and meet him. And the putting all of that time and effort, most people who really cosplay and really do big builds really love those characters. And you're not just kind of doing it because you're like, oh, I just decided on this random character. You have some sort of a real life connection to them and they've shaped you in some way. Most of us probably from when we were kids. So when we go to I go to New York Comic Con every year, it's the only chance that somebody else who if you really love Dragon Ball Z and you see somebody dressed up as Goku, that's the only, you're never going to get to meet him in real life. And the payoff of those people seeing somebody who's really good and so close to that is amazing, and you share an instant connection with that person. We're gonna be besties. You're gonna be oh my god, you're the best Goku I've ever seen, and we're gonna be cool, man, and have a kind of instant. I think it's about connection for sure.
I had an answer to that question, and her answer was so much better. I don't think I ever. That's amazing. That's such a because it's embodying it, right? There's no body. If a cartoon character doesn't have a body, so you're giving it. That's delightful.
I wanted to actually, you probably have some thoughts on this. I just got into Dexter, and in season 2 of Dexter,
Stop at the end of that season.
Well, hold on. So I was told to stop at 5 or 4.
Someone doesn't like you. Stop it. Stop.
So speaking of Dexter, in season 2, they actually find his body of work at the bottom of the marina, right?
Body of work. Get the pun?
His body of work, right? And then there's a murder that happened in a comic book store or a video store or something like that, and the guy of the comic book store who got murdered, was thinking of a comic called The Defender, and Dexter looks into the eyes of this drawing and totally actually the episode is called The Defender. So for the rest of the episode, he sees himself as the Defender because Dexter only kills bad people who quote unquote deserve to die. So but he looks at it and his eyes are basically drawn after Dexter's eyes. And he's wearing all black, and he's wearing a cape, and he fucking loves it. He's like, I actually want to be the Defender, and if I were to be a supervillain or whatever the fuck you want to call me, I want to wear that outfit, and I want to be as glamorous as the Defender, right? So I don't know if you...
The serial killer is quite different, and it's interesting. The serial Dexter, because Dexter's point is that he hides in plain sight because he looks normal. The crucial thing because Dexter's doing in some ways the opposite of some of the supervillains and the wrestlers, because they're doing outrageous outfits. But the opening credits of Dexter, the purpose of which it's an awful show, by the way, and it's season 4, but then hard stop and maybe delete some of the ones that you already saw. But who doesn't? He's adorable. But The problem with the Dexter, the opening credits to Dexter are the best part of that show. They are gorgeous. But the purpose of the opening credits is to align Dexter with you. He's doing everyday things that you do. He's putting on a t-shirt and he's tying his shoes and he shaves and he eats eggs in the morning with, ketchup, but it looks like blood. But the tying of the flossing looks like strangling somebody. So it suggests the kind of the villainy in everyday actions. The fly, he kills a fly in the opening thing. These extreme close-ups that look similar. But of course, the purpose of Dexter is he looks like a normal guy, but there's something going underneath. Whereas supervillains are often like nothing normal about me, right? The Joker's got the scars, and Vader's got the opera cape, and the
Right, but when he sees this picture, he's like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
I want to be.
So speaking of that, so one thing about wrestling fans.
identify himself, right? He wants to say, "I'm the hero.
Yeah.
Love me."
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
So one thing about wrestling fans is they tend to be rather unfashionable, right? And not spend very much time on their clothes and their appearance, in general. But I think that something about seeing wrestlers, seeing Macho Man Randy Savage. Well, like
Superhero fans are not. A lot of them are not nice or good.
Sure. But like part of it is like, I wish I had the boldness to dress like that. I wish I got to that level and had that power, and it was so macho and powerful that I can wear all sorts of crazy stuff. So there's that desire to sort of be uninhibited in that way. And I think it's interesting because the wrestling does, at least traditionally, had this sort of traditional masculinity to it, and so, but I think at the same time it's sort of pushing that. It's saying, well, in this particular context, you can be kind of flamboyant or something like that, and I think that speaks to it.
And I have some friends of mine that do a show about nobody's watching wrestling. It's drag queens sort of reviewing wrestling matches. They're amazing, and Chris Kelly is my hero, and Eric Shorey, I have a secret obsession with him that he doesn't know about. But they're these amazing guys, and is it Lady Berica? They're amazing, and they've gotten this semi-level popularity. But what's interesting is that you think about what Ben was saying, right? That you think about wrestling fans as not being fashionable or they're not caring about it. But when you get drag queens reviewing wrestling, you realize the overlap between the communities, and you can see. And Glow, I think, emphasizes this more clearly. But it requires drag queens to walk in and talk about the outfits and the tight butts and the and the ridiculous, because wrestling has an over-the-top performance of gender that is very similar to the over-the-top performance of gender that you see in drag, but it's one of those things that's so obvious that you don't notice it, right? Like the first time I saw Interview with the Vampire, I thought it was a cool movie about sexy, vampires or whatever. And it wasn't until I watched it later on that I was like, oh, these men are all deeply in love with each other, right? I mean, the story is, right, that Tom Cruise falls in love with Brad Pitt, and then once their relationship starts to fail, he does what everybody does, which is he has a baby thinking that'll save the relationship, and it doesn't. And then Antonio Banderas tries to lure Brad Pitt away, and he wants him for himself. These men are so much in love. But you don't know. But it's so right. You don't see it. You look right past it, and you don't see that at all.
Yeah, and speaking of that in wrestling, so the flamboyant dress began really in the 50s when wrestling was first on TV with this guy Gorgeous George, and he sort of was the template for Ric Flair and for everything that came since then. And the thing about it was the flamboyant guys who were coded as gay. Or whatever, who were supposed, the fans responded to them with anger. They were always bad guys, right? So being flamboyant or looking or, having sort of traits that are associated with homosexuality was an easy way to get heat, an easy way to get people to boo you, up until very recently. And this is one of the sort of horrible things about wrestling, right, is that it's been incredibly homophobic while at the same time having this weird sort of homoerotic subtext. But now things are starting to get better. So now you have people like Dalton Castle and Velveteen Dream. He's supposed to be a bad guy, but everybody loves him anyway, who are super flamboyant, and everybody loves them. And so there's been this sort of shift, again, in the professional wrestling audience. And I think they're actually starting to explicitly deal with some of those tensions now, at least on the indies, in the storylines. But there's still a problem where all these guys are flamboyant, and sometimes they're even in the storyline presented as gay, but very few of them are actually openly gay. and there's the one guy, Darren Young, who came out, and then they just didn't do anything with him. So there's this also weird tension, you know, in the queer community where it's like, all right, you're representing us, but we aren't actually represented. And so, anyway.
This is our last question of the evening. I am the heel now.
Well, first of all, a quick statement. I think it really reminds me of the dynamic of like rock stars. You know, that the seduction of androgyny and being able, yeah, exactly. But also some of like the more kind of evil slanting rock stars are also kind of playing with. They're also, you know, flamboyant and wearing things that are not traditionally masculine. So I think that that's a really interesting area of the same dynamic. But one thing that really really struck my mind, especially with violence in the modern age, with the advent of social media, as you see like in the YouTube generation, right, is these playlists of extreme sport athletes who are falling and they're hurting themselves terribly, or security cameras of like random like bar fights or fights at McDonald's. And they're not really performative. And I mean, there is a camera, but it's real violence, so the pain is real. And so I wonder, okay, well, then it must be excess and an overturning of norms. So how's it entertainment?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I think it's also just a bit of sadism, right? Sorry, it's also just a bit of sadism. It's also just that we kind of enjoy seeing people get hurt sometimes. It depends how much you watch that, right? So if that's something that like you're really, really into, then I would say, you know, like that would be a higher degree of sadism than I think would be normal for a person. Now, is there an artistic sort of violence there? Is there a performative aspect to it? There is an overturning of social norms. There is just, you know, I don't know how much you enjoy it also and how much you're just drawn to it. So like the car wreck, right? It's not like you really enjoy seeing the people hurt in the car wreck, but you still can't look away, right? So it might be maybe more of that in at least some cases, right? I don't know.
The vulnerability of mortality.
And it's just so unusual, right? So, and the thing you point out, you're watching a wrestling, say you spent like hundreds of dollars on front row seats to a wrestling or a boxing match, but then a fight breaks out in the crowd, right? Everybody's gonna look at that because it's unexpected and it's disturbing and you know, you don't know what's gonna happen.
Just thanks everybody for coming out. You have so many things you could be doing in New York City that are not this. Like, there's a lot of competition to come and see us dressed up like lunatics talking about Shakespeare and wrestling. And stay in touch with David and Chris on the ThinkOlio site and sign up for the emails so you can come to more of them. There's a lot of big, interesting changes happening at ThinkOlio, and we're plotting a whole insane David Lynch weekend in the woods. So, you know, stay in touch with us. It's going to be amazing. And I'm available on social media, all of them. I'm the only person with my name, and it's on the top of your handout, so you can follow me on all the things. And Ben, your delight.
Ben on Instagram.
Yeah, Ben's a delight. Thank you guys so much for coming out.